2013, Dan Worth and others. You can find it online with no restriction. This is an important piece of research. Why is it so important? He has done an enormous study about data banks about drugs for many countries, especially the big drug consuming countries, between 1990 and 2010. And what did he find out? He found out that during this time, billions and billions and billions had been spent on the war on drugs. That is incredible. The global spending on the war on drugs, you just cannot imagine. Now, when you spend a lot of money to fight an illegal substance and to fight the people who grow it and who traffic it, you would normally expect the more you invest, the less drugs there will be, because there will be less cultivation, less dealers, and less consumption. And the price will go up, and the quality of the drug will go down because there are so few drugs. That would be completely to be expected under an economic point of view. Now, what Dan Worth and his collaborators found out was the contrary. In spite of spending trillions and trillions of dollars, the supply of drugs had increased considerably for marijuana, for cocaine, methamphetamine, MDMA, ecstasy, everything. Instead of less drugs, there had been more drugs between 1990 and 2010. These drugs had been better. They had been getting better every year. Better in the sense of more concentrated, less diluted, and the price had gone down. There had been more drugs, they had been more concentrated, more pure, and they had become cheaper. In spite of the exact opposite that one had wanted to do, and in spite of billions and trillions of dollars invested in the fight against drugs. So if anybody still doubts the effectivity of the war on drugs, that is astonishing. It is more astonishing than anybody would have thought. How can you apply such drastic measures and expect, of course, that the supply would go down, the purity would go down, prices would go up, etc. The markets would get smaller, nothing of it. Markets bigger, more drugs, better drugs, more cheaper drugs, in spite of all these war on drug measures. That makes it very hard for people to say, well, why don't we spend more trillions and then we will finally get to what we want. There's no indication that even spending all the money there is in the world, we would get to the desired results of prohibition. So it's no wonder that at least in academic circles, people more and more are coming to the conclusion this is the wrong way. It has been the wrong way in the United States. It has shown to be completely ineffective or counterproductive in the case of illegal drugs over decades, not only since 1990, but also since 1990. So even clever people in politics like Fernando Henrique Cardoso, the last clever person that comes to my mind right now, and others, ex-presidents of Mexico, ex-presidents of Colombia, who have known what the drug problem and the drug war have been doing to their countries in terms of corruption, violence, and suffering, they have banded together in the Global Commission on Democracy and Drugs, and they have written very good papers, and they say the drug policy has to be rethought and reformulated and reoriented. And there's quite a number of persons, academics, intelligent politicians, and a number of civil society people like the founder of Virgin Records and Virgin things, Branson, I think is his name. So and Kofi Annan also, he says we have to rethink drug policy. Now the point is now, how can we rethink policy, and what do we have to do to have a better drug legislation? That is the basic question. And what are the social obstacles, the social limits, and what are the legal limits? The social limits are the fear of families for their children. They just see their family and they think prohibition helps us. So this is something we have to deal with. And this is not very easy. Because a normal family would say, well, if marijuana is legal, then my son will go and test marijuana and who knows what will happen. Another social limit is these families, they have been under the influence of mass media, which are also a drug, for decades. And they have been told these drugs are addictive. Once you try them, you are in danger of never getting free from them. So people have an image of drugs that is something like the devil. It's very close to the devil. And why do they have this image? Because our governments have been telling this all the time. All these drugs can be used in a controlled way, and nobody believes it. But that is true. And why don't people believe it? Because they have no experience. You have never seen marijuana, and your child goes to school and speaks of marijuana and say, oh my God. No. Now, people in California, they somehow have had contact with marijuana, and they say, well, it has been called the killer weed in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, but our experience has been different. Not everybody becomes a killer who smokes a joint. So it would be good if more people had first-hand experience with drugs, and they would have a demystified idea of them. Now, over the decades I have known, of course, I started also thinking, heroin, never touch heroin, you will get addicted and you will die. That was the only thing I could imagine. And then I had started working with heroin users who were putting out newspapers, doing radio station things, were going to school, talking with people, and they were controlled heroin users, something that nobody had believed that would exist. And there exist millions of controlled heroin users, and so on and so on and so on. So ignorance of drugs is a very big social limit. And this ignorance has been brought to us thanks to prohibition and thanks to the manipulative information about drugs in all these movies, in all government things, and all news and newspapers, etc. That is hard to challenge, but that would be very important. Also, of course, there are people who define themselves as good people against the bandidos, la sociedad. And they are afraid of the non-working bandidos, do mal. And I have also heard the expression, sangue mau. Tem pessoas de mau sangue, or sangue mau. Então, there are the people that are good people, and they think there are other people who are the bad people. And of course, for a group identity, it is very important to identify yourself with the good and to stigmatize the bad ones. Otherwise, you might be in danger of sliding to the bad ones or being treated as a bad one. So you have to do all sorts of things to stay a good person. And one part of staying a good person is to criminalize and to support the prohibition for the bad persons. So they go to prison or they can be killed by the police, and the more the better. That is also a social limit. There is a belief system like this which is very difficult to change. Even in Holland, the majority of the population thinks cannabis users, they are maybe the bad people. And it's a miracle that they have this tolerant drug policy. It's also in Europe, it's practically everywhere you have that, but in some places you have it especially strong, and there, of course, the pro-prohibition ideas are very strong too. And then there are the churches that don't believe in drugs either. Especially Protestant churches. Protestant churches, why is it that Protestant churches are so aversive against drugs? That is not so easy to answer. Well, they want you to lead a virtuous life. It's virtue, and it's also not to stray away from the right path. The right path is to believe, to pray, to be a good family member. And when you take drugs, you're not a good family. And when you take drugs, you might ruin your own family and your own life. So that must be the thought. And this is a good thought. It's completely correct. The problem is that these Protestant churches think it is good to have their convictions also enshrined in criminal law. It's like when you belong to a vegetarian church and you say it's better if you do not eat meat, and maybe not even eggs. That might be better for your health. That is a good thing. And why should you not be a vegetarian? And why should you not make propaganda to be a vegetarian? But there's a big difference between making propaganda to be vegetarian and to say, well, I will put everybody in prison who eats meat. Bifinho, com arroz, feijão. Quem come bifinho junto com arroz, feijão, já vai para a cadeia. So, I have all the respect for people who are vegetarian, and they can make propaganda for it, but I think it's crazy to make vegetarianism a criminal law if you violate that. There's a big difference between your ideology and the criminal law is not there to put everybody in prison who doesn't share your ideology. And to say I'm against marijuana, that is an ideology, of course, it's good. Like you can say I'm against Marlboro or against any kind of cigarettes or against cachaça. That is a good thing to say, and I admire people who do not take cachaça. But I have also respect for those who do take cachaça like I do. But it's a big difference between having the freedom to be a vegetarian and to make propaganda for vegetarianism, or to say, I make vegetarianism a law, a criminal law for the whole country. That is such a big difference, and that is the decisive difference. I don't want to take the Protestant churches, their ideas away. They have good ideas, and they are very good for society, as long as they stay their ideas, and as long as they make propaganda for this idea. Perfect. Cannot be better. But when they say, anybody who doesn't share my ideas about how one should lead one's life goes to prison or could be killed by a freaky policeman, I think that goes too far. Is that absurd to say? No, it's logical, but nobody understands. That's the funny thing about it. Well, Protestants will probably say, well, these people who take drugs and who go to prison, it's their own fault. Why do they take drugs? You can probably say that. And I want to, in society, there is something going on that can be called a blame game. One of the reasons why I speak English is I don't have the vocabulary in Portuguese. I would not know how to translate blame game. It's like to blame is culpar. É jogo de culpar pessoas. Ou eu culpo fulano tal, ou eu culpo fulano X. And I want to show you what I mean with the blame game. And that is very important for drug law reform. Yeah. Yes. What we will do is this is a small movie, and you see it is about the killing of a 22-year-old person with the name of Stephen Clark. Last month, it was not 2017, it was 2018. I put that and I messed it up. It was just last month, and it was in Sacramento, California, and he was killed in his own backyard, in the backyard of the house that belongs to his grandmother, and he lived with his grandmother in that house. And I can tell you this story. It was night, and a helicopter of the police says to the police on the ground, there is a guy who is smashing the windows of a house, and he has something in his hand to smash these windows. And we are following this guy. And then the police on the ground, they say, yeah, where is he, where is he? And then they find the guy, and they see somebody. But the problem is, it is night, the guy is black, and he holds something in his hand, and the police think, well, that must be the thing with which he has been breaking the windows, or maybe it's a weapon, and they shoot 20 times. And they kill him, and then he lies there in his own backyard of his own house and that of his grandmother, and he's completely dead. And what did he have in his hand? An iPhone. Yeah, that can be mistaken for a weapon. So, he was not armed, probably it was not even him who had been smashing windows. There was no reason why he should be smashing windows at his neighbor's place, etc. And he was dead. And what happens then? Well, normally that would be murder, or well, not murder, it would be negligent manslaughter, something in between. But then the first thing the police says is, well, he was unarmed, but maybe he had been smashing windows, maybe with his iPhone, or maybe not. But, well, we have found out that this guy had already been in contact with the police some 8 years ago. Now he's 22. But 8 years ago, he had been in contact with the police for the possession of a firearm. And then some time ago, he had been in contact with the police for possession of a controlled drug. And also, in the driveway of the house, there was a golden, well, the color was gold. It was not really gold, but a golden Cadillac. So he is living with his grandmother. He is 22 years old. Now you think, well, the case is a little dubious. Maybe this guy was really a criminal. And so people tend to think, well, that is not so important that he is dead, because he may not have been doing criminal activities at the moment he was shot, but he may have been a criminal. Black Cadillac somewhere, and substances. I mean, to be associated with a controlled substance means, well, he is not one of the people of good. He is not Daubin. And the car also speaks something. Well, if there's a car like this, he is also not Daubin. Maybe he is a drug dealer. How could he have the money for a car? And this is the way the police is acting, because they know the population thinks like this. They could also have said, and this was also true, he was a young man and he was socially active, and he had 2 young kids of 1 year and 3 years, and he loved them and he was playing with them, and he was a good father and a well-respected person in his neighborhood. That was also true, but the police didn't say that. They said he had had contact with the police. Now, to have contact with the police as a young black person in California, this is the most normal thing in the world. When you're born as a black person, you probably have contact with the police. And when you're 35 or 45 and still alive, practically every black person has had contact with the police, because they look at you all the time and shoot at you all the time. So I just want to show you this thing. And then I want to discuss the question, who is guilty?
The Sacramento Police Department has released body cam footage following the shooting of a 23-year-old man by the name of Stephon Clark. He was shot and killed in his own backyard, and it all happened when police were looking for an individual who was breaking into cars. They allegedly mistook Clark as the suspect and chased him into his grandmother's backyard. He was living with his grandmother at the time, and believed that he had a gun, when in reality he was holding his cell phone. And the 2 police officers fired 10 shots each, so 20 shots total. Both officers involved with the shooting were placed on paid administrative leave. Now, there was public outcry following that shooting, and so in an effort to be transparent with the community, finally, the officers have decided, or the police department has decided to release the footage. What we're about to show you is incredibly graphic. I want to make sure to give you guys that warning. But with that said, let's take a look at the first video.
Here we see the Cadillac.
Hey! Show me your hands! Stop! Stop! Watch something. Show me your hands! Get it! Show me your hands! Get it!
Show me your gun. And he shows the iPhone.
5-7, shots fired. 7 go. Show me your hands! See your hands!
He's already dead. Show me your hands.
5-7, he's down. No movement. We're gonna need additional units.
Yeah, we need additional units.
It's hard to see, right? So now cops in the right wing will then use that as an excuse for, well, it was hard to see, so they didn't know if he had a gun or not. If you didn't know if he had a gun or not, maybe you shouldn't have killed him. So when I see that it's hard to see, I get that the cops have a tough job, and if you're in that backyard and that guy's running, by the way, the report was that the guy had what they're calling a toolbar, presumably a crowbar, right? What is he gonna throw it at you? Did he switch the crowbar for a gun? When did he switch?
But that's a very good analysis in this thing. So when you look
So,
at this page,
one of the things that we talk
worthwhile
about
to
a
look at
lot
it.
when these stories come up is